The valet's eyes lingered a moment too long on Marcus Wellington's Bentley before accepting the keys. It was the same look Marcus had grown accustomed to over the years, surprise mixed with skepticism, as if the car might be stolen or borrowed. He straightened his Armani jacket and walked toward Meridian's gleaming entrance, the weight of success heavy on his shoulders despite tonight's triumph. The acquisition of Dataflow Industries had taken 18 months to close. 18 months of proving his company's worth to investors who questioned every projection, every strategy, every decision that bore his signature. But tonight, Wellington Tech Solutions was officially a $50 million enterprise, and Marcus had earned the right to celebrate in Atlanta's most exclusive steakhouse. The brass doors opened to reveal a world of warm amber lighting and hushed conversations. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across mahogany walls lined with vintage photographs of the city's elite. The air carried the rich aroma of aged beef and expensive wine, punctuated by the soft clink of silverware against bone china. "Good evening, sir." The hostess's voice carried the practiced sweetness of Southern hospitality, but her blue eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Do you have a reservation?" "Wellington, 8 o'clock. Marcus's voice remained steady, professional. He'd learned long ago that confidence was armor in spaces like this. She scrolled through her tablet, fingers moving slower than necessary. "Wellington, Wellington." The pause stretched like a held breath. "Oh yes, here we are. Right this way, please." The walk through the dining room felt like a gauntlet. Conversations didn't stop, but voices lowered. Eyes followed his movement with the subtle persistence of security cameras. An elderly woman in pearls whispered something to her companion, who turned to stare with undisguised curiosity. A businessman in a navy suit paused mid-sentence, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. Marcus had navigated these waters for decades. The boardrooms where he was the only black face, the country clubs where membership came with unspoken conditions, the networking events where his presence was tolerated but never truly welcomed. He'd built his armor piece by piece, success by success, until he could walk through any door with his head held high. But tonight felt different, heavier. "Here we are," the hostess announced, gesturing to a corner table tucked behind a decorative pillar. The spot offered privacy, certainly, but it wasn't the window table he'd specifically requested when making the reservation. From here, he could see the restaurant's main dining area, but remained largely hidden from view. "Actually, I requested table 12 by the window," Marcus said, his tone remaining pleasant but firm. "Oh, I'm so sorry. That table is... well, it's been reserved for one of our regular guests. But this spot is lovely, very intimate." Her smile stretched tighter, like plastic wrap over leftovers. Marcus surveyed the window table in question. Empty. Reserved sign nowhere in sight. He could push the issue, demand the table he'd requested and paid for, but he'd learned to pick his battles carefully. Some fights weren't worth the energy, especially when victory came at the cost of being labeled difficult or aggressive. "This will be fine," he said, settling into the leather chair that faced away from the main dining room. 20 minutes passed. Marcus checked his Rolex twice, watching other tables receive immediate attention while his water glass remained empty. A young couple who'd arrived after him was already enjoying their appetizers. The businessman who'd stared earlier was cutting into what looked like a perfectly prepared filet mignon. When footsteps finally approached his table, Marcus looked up to see a young black woman in the restaurant's crisp white uniform. She couldn't have been more than 22, with natural hair pulled back in a neat bun and intelligent eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Good evening, Mr. Wellington. I'm Zara, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Her voice was soft, professional, but her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the water pitcher. "I apologize for the wait. We're quite busy this evening." As she poured his water, Marcus noticed the way her eyes darted nervously around the dining room, as if she were being watched. There was something in her expression, a mixture of fear and recognition that made him study her face more carefully. "Thank you, Zara." He used her name deliberately, the way his grandmother had taught him to acknowledge service workers as human beings worthy of respect. "Take your time. I'm in no rush." But even as he spoke the words, Marcus felt the familiar tension building in his chest. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a moment to savor the fruits of his labor. Instead, he found himself once again navigating the invisible barriers that seemed to follow him everywhere, even into the most exclusive establishments his success could buy. Zara's hands steadied as she finished pouring, but the fear in her eyes remained, along with something else Marcus couldn't quite identify. Something that suggested this evening would be far more complicated than a simple dinner celebration. Zara's shift had started like any other, checking tables, polishing silverware, pretending not to notice the way certain customers were guided to specific sections of the restaurant. She'd learned to read the subtle codes in her 8 months at Meridian. The hesitant pause when black diners requested reservations, the way prime tables mysteriously became unavailable, the kitchen staff's knowing glances when orders came from certain sections. Tonight, watching Marcus Wellington sit with quiet dignity in his corner exile, she felt the familiar knot tighten in her stomach. He didn't belong in that shadowy corner any more than she belonged serving tables instead of studying for her nursing boards. But here they were, both playing roles in a theater of polite discrimination. Table 7 needs their wine list, called Sarah, a blonde server who'd started 2 months after Zara, but somehow always got the best sections. And David wants to see you. David Kellerman, the restaurant manager, stood behind the host station like a general surveying his battlefield. His steel-gray eyes tracked every movement in the dining room, but tonight they lingered on Marcus's table with particular intensity. "Zara, I need you to handle that gentleman personally," David said, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken instructions. "Make sure he has everything he needs. We want all our guests to feel comfortable." The word comfortable hung in the air like smoke. Zara understood the subtext. Keep him happy, keep him quiet, make sure there are no complaints that might reach the wrong ears. She'd seen this dance before, the careful choreography of damage control disguised as hospitality. Walking back to Marcus's table, Zara caught fragments of conversation from the kitchen pass. "Probably can't even afford the ribeye. What's he trying to prove? David's watching him like a hawk." The words cut through her like broken glass. She'd heard similar whispers about other black customers, watched good people reduced to stereotypes and assumptions by staff who smiled to their faces while sharpening knives behind their backs. "Have you decided on your order, Mr. Wellington?" Zara asked, her pen poised over her notepad. "The ribeye medium rare. And please, call me Marcus." His smile was genuine, the kind that reached his eyes and reminded her why she'd chosen nursing, to help people, to see their humanity first. "You mentioned you're in school?" "Nursing program at Georgia State. Just finished my clinicals." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Most customers didn't ask follow-up questions, didn't care about the lives of the people serving them. "That's impressive. My mother was a nurse. Toughest woman I ever knew." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his attention focused entirely on her. "What's your specialty?" "Pediatric oncology. I want to work with children who—" Zara's voice caught. She thought of her brother Malik, only 16, working nights at a grocery store to help with expenses while she chased dreams that sometimes felt impossibly distant. "That's noble work. The world needs more people like you." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. Here was a man who'd clearly fought his own battles, achieved success that most people could only dream of, and he was treating her like she mattered, like her dreams were valid. But as she walked toward the kitchen to place his order, the weight of what she knew pressed down on her shoulders like a lead blanket. 3 months ago, she'd been cleaning the private dining room when she'd overheard a conversation that had haunted her ever since. David and 2 men in expensive suits, their voices thick with wine and arrogance, discussing Marcus Wellington like he was a problem to be solved. The memory played in her mind like a broken record. Racial slurs spoken with casual cruelty, plans to undermine his business deals, laughter at his expense. They'd talked about him like he was nothing, less than nothing, while she'd stood frozen behind the service door, invisible in her uniform but witness to their hatred. Now, watching Marcus study his phone with the quiet confidence of a man who believed in his own success, Zara felt sick. He had no idea that the very people he might trust, might do business with, had been plotting his downfall in the same restaurant where he now sat celebrating. The kitchen bell chimed, and she retrieved his perfectly prepared ribeye, the meat seared to perfection and plated with artistic precision. As she approached his table, Marcus looked up with that same genuine smile, and Zara realized she was standing at a crossroads. She could serve his dinner, collect her tip, and let him continue living in blissful ignorance. Or she could find the courage to shatter his world with the truth she'd been carrying like a poison in her chest. The plate trembled in her hands as she set it before him, and Marcus noticed. "Are you all right?" The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, nearly broke her resolve. How could she tell this kind, successful man that his trust had been weaponized against him? How could she destroy his celebration with the knowledge that would change everything? "I'm fine, thank you," Zara whispered, stepping back as Marcus cut into his ribeye. The meat released a perfect stream of pink juice, and he nodded approvingly before taking his first bite. The flavor transported him back 23 years, to a cramped apartment in East Atlanta where his mother worked double shifts at Grady Hospital just to keep food on the table. Back then, steak was a luxury reserved for birthdays and report cards with straight A's. He'd earned plenty of both, driven by a hunger that went far beyond food. The scholarship to Georgia Tech had been his ticket out, but walking onto that campus had felt like entering a foreign country. While his classmates discussed spring break trips to Europe, Marcus worked nights at a computer repair shop, learning to code by day and fixing broken machines by night. His dorm room became a sanctuary where he could shed the exhaustion of constantly proving he belonged. "You sure you're qualified for this program?" Professor Davidson had asked during his first computer science class, squinting over wire-rimmed glasses. "The coursework is quite rigorous." Marcus had simply nodded, swallowing the words that burned in his throat. By semester's end, he'd earned the highest grade in the class. The memory dissolved as he noticed Zara refilling water glasses at nearby tables, her movements mechanical but her eyes repeatedly drifting back to him. There was something in her expression, a weight that reminded him of his younger self, carrying secrets too heavy for such young shoulders. His phone buzzed with a text from his business partner. "James, congrats again on data flow. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate." Marcus smiled, remembering their first meeting 8 years ago. James had walked into the coffee shop expecting to meet with Marcus's boss, not realizing the young black man in the corner booth was the CEO he'd come to see. "I think there's been a mistake," James had said, looking around the cafe. "I'm supposed to meet with the head of Wellington Tech. That would be me." Marcus had stood, extending his hand. Marcus Wellington. The pause that followed had lasted only seconds, but it contained volumes. Surprise, recalculation, the subtle shift in posture that Marcus had learned to recognize. James had recovered quickly, but the damage was done. Every subsequent meeting required Marcus to prove himself anew, to demonstrate that his success wasn't affirmative action or luck, but the result of relentless work and undeniable talent. The Dataflow acquisition had taken 18 months partly because of due diligence, but mostly because investors needed time to believe that a black-owned tech company could handle such a significant deal. Marcus had presented the same projections 5 times to 5 different groups, each one requiring additional proof that his numbers were real, his strategy sound, his leadership capable. "We just want to make sure you have the infrastructure to support this kind of growth," one investor had said, his tone suggesting Marcus was playing dress-up in a grown man's suit. Marcus had responded with spreadsheets, testimonials, and a track record that spoke for itself. But even now, savoring his victory dinner, he felt the familiar exhaustion that came with being perpetually on trial. The restaurant's ambient lighting cast long shadows across his table, and Marcus caught his reflection in the window. A successful man dining alone, celebrating achievements that had cost him more than money could measure. He'd built his company from nothing, but the price had been steep. Relationships sacrificed on the altar of ambition, friendships lost to the demands of being twice as good, family gatherings missed because success required constant vigilance. His mother had died 3 years ago, proud but worried. "You've got everything you wanted, baby," she'd whispered from her hospital bed. "But do you have anyone to share it with?" The question haunted him still. Success had brought him wealth, respect, and recognition, but it had also isolated him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He was too successful for some circles, not successful enough for others, and always aware that his achievements were viewed through the lens of his race. "How's everything tasting?" Zara appeared beside his table again, her voice carefully controlled but her hands betraying a slight tremor. "Excellent. Really?" Marcus looked up at her, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way she glanced toward the kitchen as if expecting trouble. "Are you sure you're all right? You seem—" "I'm fine, sir. It's been a long day." But her eyes told a different story. They held the same weight Marcus recognized in his own reflection, the burden of carrying truths too dangerous to speak, of navigating spaces where one wrong move could cost everything. As Zara walked away, Marcus felt an unexpected kinship with the young waitress. Success had taught him to read people, to recognize the signs of someone fighting battles they couldn't discuss. Whatever was troubling her, it was more than exhaustion from a long shift. The realization settled over him like a shadow, transforming his celebration dinner into something else entirely. Tonight wasn't just about his victory. It was about the invisible struggles that connected him to every person of color trying to make their way in a world that demanded constant proof of their worth. And somehow, he sensed that Zara held a piece of that puzzle he wasn't prepared to see. Marcus was finishing his last bite of ribeye when the voices drifted over from the bar area, just loud enough to pierce the restaurant's carefully orchestrated ambience. He recognized one immediately, David Kellerman's practiced tone, smooth as aged whiskey but with an edge that cut through the evening's warmth. "Councilman Bradley, always a pleasure to see you." David's voice carried the obsequious quality reserved for Meridian's most influential patrons. "How's the family?" "Can't complain, David. Though I have to say, I'm concerned about the direction this neighborhood is heading." The councilman's voice was gravelly, weathered by years of political speeches and backroom deals. "We need to be careful about maintaining standards. You know what I mean?" Marcus set down his fork, his appetite suddenly gone. The conversation was happening 20 feet away, but the words carried with surgical precision across the dining room's acoustic design. "Absolutely, sir. We've always prided ourselves on maintaining a certain atmosphere here at Meridian." David's pause was pregnant with meaning. "Our clientele expects a particular level of service, a certain environment." Good. Can't have just anyone thinking they belong in establishments like this. Bad for business, bad for the community. The councilman's laugh was harsh, like gravel scraping against concrete. "You understand the importance of discretion, I'm sure." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He'd heard this language before, the coded phrases that allowed people to express their prejudices without explicitly stating them. Certain clientele, maintaining standards, particular environment. Each phrase was a dog whistle, perfectly pitched to communicate exclusion while maintaining plausible deniability. Across the dining room, Zara moved between tables like a ghost, her face a mask of professional composure that barely concealed the storm beneath. She'd been watching the conversation unfold with growing dread, knowing exactly what those carefully chosen words meant. She'd heard them before in this very restaurant, spoken with far less subtlety. 3 months ago, she'd been assigned to clean the private dining room after a late business meeting. The room was supposed to be empty, but voices had echoed from behind the partially closed door. She'd frozen in the hallway, mop in hand, as the conversation unfolded like a nightmare. "That arrogant black CEO thinks he's untouchable," one voice had sneered. It was David, but without his usual professional veneer. "Wellington's getting too big for his britches." "Marcus Wellington?" Another voice, older, more refined. "I know him. Cocky bastard thinks he can play in our league." "Well, maybe it's time someone reminded him where he belongs." A third voice, younger but equally venomous. "His data flow bid is solid, but rumors have a way of spreading." Questions about financial stability, management competence. The laughter that followed had made Zara's skin crawl. They'd used words she couldn't repeat, racial slurs delivered with casual cruelty, while they plotted to destroy a man's life's work. She'd stood paralyzed in that hallway, invisible in her uniform, as they discussed Marcus Wellington like he was a problem to be eliminated rather than a human being with dreams and dignity. "The beauty is, we don't have to do anything illegal," David had continued. "Just plant some seeds of doubt with the right people. Question his company's projections. Suggest he's overextended. By the time the rumors make their rounds, the data flow deal will be dead in the water." Now, watching Marcus sit alone at his corner table, Zara felt the weight of that knowledge crushing her chest. He was celebrating a victory that these men had tried to steal from him, toasting success they'd attempted to sabotage. The irony was suffocating. He was dining in the very establishment where his destruction had been planned. "Zara, table 12 needs their dessert menu." Sarah's voice cut through her reverie, sharp with impatience. "Of course." Zara's response was automatic, but her eyes remained fixed on Marcus. He was staring toward the bar area, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition to something darker. He'd heard enough to understand. The restaurant's elegant facade was crumbling before her eyes. The warm lighting that had seemed inviting now felt harsh and exposing. The quiet conversations that had provided ambience now sounded like whispered conspiracies. The crystal and china that had sparkled with sophistication now seemed like props in a theater of exclusion. Marcus's phone buzzed on the table, but he didn't reach for it. His hands remained folded, his posture rigid with the kind of control that came from years of swallowing rage. Zara recognized the look. She'd seen it in her own mirror countless times, the expression of someone who just realized they were unwelcome in a space they'd thought they'd earned the right to occupy. The councilman's laughter echoed across the dining room again, and Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He was putting the pieces together, understanding that his celebration dinner had become something else entirely, a moment of awakening that would change everything. Zara clutched the dessert menus against her chest, her heart pounding as she realized the impossible choice before her. She could remain silent, protect her job, and let Marcus continue living with partial truths. Or she could find the courage to tell him everything, knowing it would shatter his world and possibly destroy her own. The weight of 3 months' worth of secrets pressed down on her shoulders as she watched the most successful black man she'd ever met discover that his achievements meant nothing to the people who controlled the spaces where success was supposed to be celebrated. The decision crystallized in Zara's mind like ice forming on a winter window, sudden, irreversible, and terrifyingly clear. She watched Marcus push his empty plate away, his movements deliberate but heavy with the weight of what he'd overheard. The councilman's laughter still echoed from the bar, each sound a reminder of the hatred that lurked beneath Meridian's polished surface. Her hands trembled as she retrieved a cloth napkin from the service station, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. The words came in fragments at first, scrawled in blue ink between stolen moments when no one was watching. Names, dates, the ugly truth she'd carried for 3 months. "Mr. Wellington, 3 months ago, I witnessed David Kellerman meeting with 2 investors in our private dining room. They discussed sabotaging your dataflow acquisition. They used racial slurs and planned to spread rumors about your company's financial stability. I heard everything. You deserve to know the truth." Zara Thompson, she stared at the words, knowing they represented a point of no return. Once she handed Marcus this napkin, there would be no taking it back. David would know it came from her. Who else had access to the private dining room that night? Her job would be gone by morning, and with it, her ability to pay for nursing school, to support Malik, to build the future she'd fought so hard to create. But looking at Marcus, seeing the quiet dignity with which he bore the weight of constant scrutiny, she knew she couldn't remain silent. He represented everything she hoped to become: successful, respected, unbroken by a world that demanded twice the effort for half the recognition. If she couldn't protect that, what was the point of her own dreams? The check leather arrived at her station, and Zara folded the napkin with surgical precision, her nursing training evident in the careful creases. She approached Marcus's table on unsteady legs, the restaurant's ambient noise fading to a dull roar in her ears. "Here's your check, Mr. Wellington." Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears, thin and distant. The leather folder felt impossibly heavy as she placed it on the table, the folded napkin tucked discreetly beneath. Marcus looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. In his gaze, she saw recognition, not of her specifically, but of the struggle they shared. The exhaustion of being perpetually on guard, the isolation that came with breaking barriers, the price of success in a world that questioned their right to achieve it. "Thank you for your kindness tonight, Mr. Wellington." The words came out as a whisper, barely audible above the restaurant's carefully orchestrated symphony of clinking glasses and muted conversations. "Please read this when you get home." Her fingers brushed the napkin as she adjusted the check folder, and Marcus's eyes followed the movement. Confusion flickered across his features, the same expression she'd seen on patients' faces when she delivered news that would change everything. "I'm sorry." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle but questioning. "The service. Please read about the service when you get home." Zara's improvisation was clumsy, but it was enough. She stepped back before he could ask more questions, before her resolve could crumble under the weight of what she'd just done. Marcus opened the leather folder, revealing a bill that reflected Meridian's premium pricing. He pulled out his Black American Express card without looking at the total, a gesture that spoke to the success he'd earned and the battles he'd fought to achieve it. "Keep the change," he said, handing her the folder with a tip that was more than generous. "And Zara? Good luck with nursing school. The world needs more people like you." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her. Here was a man who just discovered he was unwelcome in a space he'd thought he'd earned the right to occupy, and he was still thinking about her dreams, her future. It confirmed everything she'd believed about him, everything that had made her decision inevitable. Marcus stood, straightening his jacket with the same careful precision she'd noticed all evening. He pocketed the napkin without unfolding it, trusting her enough to wait until he was home to read whatever message she'd risked everything to deliver. As he walked toward the exit, Zara watched him navigate the dining room one final time. Other patrons glanced up from their meals, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. But Marcus moved with quiet dignity, his head held high despite the weight of what he'd learned tonight. The brass doors closed behind him with a soft whisper, and Zara felt the full magnitude of what she'd done settle over her like a shroud. She'd just handed a stranger the power to destroy the very people who controlled her livelihood. She'd chosen truth over security, justice over self-preservation. David appeared at her elbow as if summoned by her guilt. "Everything goes smoothly with Mr. Wellington?" His voice carried its usual professional polish, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "Yes, sir." He seemed very satisfied with the service. "Good. We want all our guests to feel appropriately welcomed." The word appropriately hung in the air like a threat, and Zara understood that her time at Meridian was already numbered. David might not know exactly what she'd done, but he sensed something had shifted. The only question was whether Marcus would read her note in time to make her sacrifice meaningful. The elevator to Marcus's penthouse climbed 32 floors in silence, each passing number marking his ascent from the street-level reality of Meridian's discrimination to the rarefied air of his success. The city sprawled below through floor-to-ceiling windows, Atlanta's skyline glittering like scattered diamonds against black velvet. But tonight, the view felt different. Less like a kingdom he'd conquered and more like a stage where he'd been performing a role he'd never fully understood. Marcus loosened his tie and poured himself 2 fingers of Macallan 25, the amber liquid catching the light from his modern chandelier. The napkin sat on his marble kitchen island like an unexploded bomb, its innocent white surface hiding truths that would reshape everything he thought he knew about his place in the world. He unfolded it slowly, Zara's careful handwriting revealing itself line by line. The words hit him like physical blows. Sabotaging your data flow acquisition, racial slurs, spread rumors about your company's financial stability. Each phrase was a knife twist, not just because of the betrayal, but because of how naive he'd been to believe his success had earned him immunity from such hatred. "David Kellerman," he whispered to the empty penthouse. The name tasted bitter on his tongue. He'd shaken that man's hand, complimented his restaurant, trusted him to provide a space worthy of celebration. Instead, David had been orchestrating his downfall while serving him dinner. Marcus's phone buzzed with notifications, congratulatory messages about the Dataflow deal that now felt hollow. He ignored them, opening his laptop instead. If Zara was right, there would be evidence. Digital footprints, paper trails, the kind of documentation that could expose not just a conspiracy, but an entire system designed to keep people like him in their place. The first call went to his private investigator, a former FBI agent named Patricia Chen who specialized in corporate espionage. Patricia, I need you to dig into something. Tonight. I don't care what it costs. Marcus? This past midnight. What's going on? Someone tried to sabotage the Dataflow deal. I need to know who, when, and how deep this goes. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. Send me everything you have. I'll start immediately. The second call was harder. James Morrison, his business partner and closest friend in the industry, answered on the third ring. Marcus? Jesus, it's late. Everything okay? James, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Marcus stared out at the city lights, each one representing lives and dreams and struggles he'd thought he'd transcended. Did anyone ever approach you about the Dataflow deal? Anyone suggesting we weren't ready for it? Or that the company might be unstable? The pause that followed was answer enough. Marcus, listen. Who was it, James? Look, it was just talk. Cocktail party bullshit. Richard Blackwood from Meridian Capital mentioned some concerns, but I told him he was full of shit. I never took it seriously. Richard Blackwood. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering the man from various industry events. Silver-haired, old money. The kind of investor who spoke in coded language about cultural fit and traditional values. He'd been one of the voices in Zara's note, one of the men plotting his destruction over expensive wine. What exactly did he say? He suggested you might be overextended, that minority-owned businesses sometimes bite off more than they can chew. I shut him down immediately. Marcus, you have to believe that. The words stung because Marcus could hear the truth in them. James had defended him, but the fact that such a conversation had happened at all revealed the precarious nature of his success. He was always one rumor away from losing everything, always subject to scrutiny that his white competitors never faced. By dawn, Marcus had assembled a devastating picture. Patricia's preliminary research revealed a pattern of discrimination at Meridian that went far beyond his own experience. Employees of color systematically passed over for promotions, customers subjected to inferior service, business deals discussed and influenced by racial bias. The restaurant wasn't just a place where discrimination happened, it was a hub where it was organized and weaponized. But the personal betrayal cut deepest. Richard Blackwood had been spreading rumors about Wellington Tech's financial stability for months, using his influence to plant seeds of doubt with potential clients and investors. The Dataflow deal had succeeded despite his efforts, not because of Marcus's merit alone, but because he'd had to work twice as hard to overcome manufactured obstacles. The sun rose over Atlanta's skyline, painting the city in shades of gold and amber that reminded Marcus of the whiskey he'd been nursing all night. His phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 unread messages, but he ignored them all. There was only one call that mattered now. Zara Thompson? The voice that answered was young, male, suspicious. This is Marcus Wellington. I need to speak with Zara. It's urgent. She's not here, man. They fired her yesterday. Some bullshit about unprofessional conduct. Marcus's heart sank. Zara had sacrificed everything to warn him, and now she was paying the price for her courage. The young man on the phone, probably her brother, sounded angry and protective, the way Marcus wished he'd had someone to be when he was starting out. Can you tell me where to find her? I want to help. Help? You're the reason she lost her job in the first place. The accusation hit home because it was true. Zara's act of courage had cost her everything. While Marcus still had his penthouse, his company, his comfortable life, the inequality of their sacrifice was stark and shameful. You're right, Marcus said quietly, but I want to make it right. She deserves better than this. The silence stretched for long moments before the young man spoke again. She's at Grady Hospital. Volunteer shift in the children's ward. But if you hurt her any more than you already have, I won't. I promise. As Marcus ended the call, he realized that the comfortable illusion of his post-racial success was already shattered. The question now wasn't whether to fight back. Zara had made that choice for both of them when she handed him that napkin. The question was how to ensure that her sacrifice meant something, and how to protect the young woman who'd risked everything to give him the truth he'd been too successful to see. The morning sun cast long shadows across Meridian's pristine facade as Marcus stood on the sidewalk, watching the restaurant prepare for another day of carefully orchestrated discrimination. Through the windows, he could see David Kellerman directing the morning setup, his movements sharp and authoritative as he positioned his staff like pieces on a chessboard. Marcus had found Zara at Grady Hospital, reading to children in the oncology ward with the same gentle patience she'd shown him that night. When he'd approached her, she'd looked up with eyes that held no surprise, as if she'd been expecting him, waiting for the moment when their separate struggles would converge into something larger than either could face alone. "I lost my job," she'd said simply, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "David called it unprofessional conduct. Said I violated customer privacy." "I know, and I'm sorry." Marcus had sat beside her in the hospital's sterile hallway, surrounded by the sounds of healing and hope. "But we're going to make this right. Together." Now, 3 hours later, they stood side by side as news vans pulled up to the curb. Marcus had learned long ago that success meant having the right connections, and this morning he'd called in every favor he'd accumulated over 2 decades of building his empire. Channel 2, Channel 5, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, they'd all responded to his invitation with the hunger of journalists who sensed a story that would resonate far beyond the business pages. "You don't have to do this," Marcus said quietly as reporters began setting up their equipment. "I can handle this alone." "No." Zara's voice carried a strength that reminded him of his mother, of every black woman who'd ever stood up when standing up meant risking everything. "This isn't just about you, Mr. Wellington. It's about every person who's been made to feel like they don't belong in spaces they've earned the right to occupy." The first reporter approached, Angela Martinez from Channel 2, a woman whose investigative pieces had exposed corruption throughout Atlanta's power structure. Her cameraman adjusted his equipment as she checked her notes, preparing to capture a moment that would ripple through the city's consciousness. "Mr. Wellington, can you tell us why you've called this press conference?" Marcus looked at the restaurant behind him, its elegant exterior hiding the rot within. 3 nights ago, I celebrated a major business acquisition at Meridian. I thought I was dining in a place that respected success, regardless of who achieved it. I was wrong. His voice carried across the gathering crowd, drawing curious onlookers and early commuters who stopped to witness something unprecedented. A successful black businessman publicly challenging the very establishment that had tried to destroy him. This young woman, Zara Thompson, risked her livelihood to expose a conspiracy against my company. She was fired for telling the truth about systematic discrimination that goes far beyond one restaurant or one business deal. Zara stepped forward, her nursing scrubs replaced by a simple dress that somehow made her look both vulnerable and unbreakable. I witnessed conversations where racial slurs were used casually, where successful black professionals were mocked and targeted for destruction. I couldn't stay silent. The questions came rapidly after that, each one peeling back another layer of Meridian's carefully constructed facade. Marcus revealed the names, the dates, the documented evidence of discrimination that Patricia Chun had uncovered through the night. But it was Zara's testimony that gave the story its emotional weight, her account of watching good people reduced to stereotypes, of serving customers who were judged by their skin color rather than their character. "How many others have experienced this?" Angela Martinez asked, her pen moving rapidly across her notepad. "That's what we're here to find out," Marcus replied. "This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that success is measured by merit, not melanin." As the press conference concluded, Marcus noticed movement behind Meridian's windows. David Kellerman stood watching from inside, his face pale with the realization that his carefully guarded secrets were now public knowledge. Other figures moved in the shadows, investors, city officials, the very people who'd thought their discrimination could remain hidden behind closed doors and coded language. But Marcus also saw something else. His phone buzzing with messages from potential clients who'd watched the press conference, business leaders who respected his courage, investors who wanted to partner with a company that stood for something beyond profit. The very integrity that Meridian's conspirators had tried to weaponize against him was becoming his greatest asset. "What happens now?" Zara asked as the reporters packed up their equipment. Marcus looked at the young woman who'd risked everything to give him the truth, then at the restaurant that had tried to destroy them both. "Now we build something better. Together." The word "together" hung in the morning air like a promise, transforming two individual acts of courage into the foundation of something larger. A movement that would refuse to accept discrimination as the price of success. The Wellington Center for Professional Excellence buzzed with the energy of ambition and possibility. Young voices filled the converted warehouse space, discussing business plans, sharing networking strategies, and building the kind of connections that had once been reserved for exclusive clubs and private dining rooms. Marcus stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching Atlanta's skyline shimmer in the late afternoon sun, but his attention was focused on the scene behind him. "Mr. Wellington?" A familiar voice made him turn. Zara approached with the confident stride of someone who'd found her place in the world, her hospital ID badge catching the light as she moved. 6 months had transformed her. The nervous waitress had evolved into a pediatric nurse whose presence commanded respect in any room she entered. "Zara, how are the kids today?" Marcus's smile was genuine, warmed by the knowledge that her dreams had not only survived but flourished in the aftermath of their shared ordeal. 3 successful surgeries this week, and little Marcus, yes, I named him after you, finally went home to his family. Her eyes sparkled with the satisfaction that came from work that mattered, from making a difference in lives that hung in the balance. "But I'm not here about the hospital. I wanted to thank you for this." She gestured toward the bustling center, where young professionals of color gathered around mentors who looked like them, who understood their struggles because they'd lived them. The Wellington Foundation had funded not just the space, but the programs that filled it: leadership development, entrepreneurship training, and most importantly, the kind of support network that could sustain dreams through the inevitable challenges ahead. "You don't need to thank me. You made this possible." Marcus's voice carried the weight of truth. "Your courage that night changed everything, not just for us, but for everyone who walks through these doors." The ripple effects of their press conference had exceeded even Marcus's expectations. Meridian had closed within 3 months, its reputation destroyed by investigations that revealed decades of systematic discrimination. David Kellerman faced federal charges for civil rights violations, while Richard Blackwood's investment firm lost major clients who refused to associate with documented racism. But more importantly, other victims had found their voices, creating a movement that demanded accountability from Atlanta's business establishment. "Sometimes I think about that night," Zara said, watching a group of young women discuss their startup plans with animated gestures. "How terrified I was to hand you that napkin. How certain I was that speaking up would destroy everything I'd worked for. And instead, it built something better. We built something better." Her correction was gentle but firm. "This center, these programs, the scholarship fund, none of it would exist if you hadn't been willing to risk your comfortable success to fight for what was right." Marcus nodded, understanding that their partnership had taught him the most valuable lesson of his career. True success wasn't measured by the barriers you broke, but by the doors you opened for others. The Wellington Center represented more than philanthropy. It was a declaration that excellence had no color, that opportunity should be determined by merit rather than melanin. "The next generation won't have to carry secrets like you did," Marcus said, watching a young man present his business plan to a panel of successful entrepreneurs. "They'll have advocates, allies, and most importantly, they'll know they're not alone." Zara smiled, the expression transforming her face with hope and determination. "That's the real victory, isn't it? Not just surviving the discrimination, but ensuring it doesn't survive us." The note that had once left Marcus frozen with shock had become the foundation for a movement that refused to accept injustice as the price of success. Their unlikely alliance, born from courage over a dinner check, had created something neither could have achieved alone. A future where young professionals of color could dream without limits, knowing that someone would be there to catch them if they fell, and to celebrate with them when they soared.